Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com. How to make a rust-resistant knife out of AEBL stainless steel. Now, I've been wanting to make stainless knives for a long time, but it's a little bit more of a complicated process. You need a heat treating oven, and the heat treating is a little bit complex. Bottom line, my heat treating oven is on back order for 5 weeks. I got to talking with fellow member of the Facebook group Knives and Knife Making, Dave Irving from Evader Knives. He agreed to do a collab video with me. Basically, he's going to send me one of his AEB-L blanks. I'm going to send him 2 of my 1095 blanks. I'll finish his, he'll finish mine. But the best part is he agreed that if I send back my AEB-L blanks to him, he'll do the heat treating for me. Anyway, on this video, we're going to really make 3 knives, but I'm going to focus on Dave's blank. This is his design. This is the blank that he sent to me. I'm just going to finish it up. Before we get into that, we'll take a look at the couple of the blanks that I cut out. Now, this is just cut out of 3/16 thick AEB-L stainless. I cut it out with Jason Northgard's bandsaw. And then I'm just going to finish up shaping these blanks on my Oregon Blade Maker 2x72 grinder. I'm using a coarse grit 36 grit belt and just rough shaping the whole outline of the blade, including the handles. These are all going to be full tang knives. They're all going to be hollow ground. So these are basically the 2 blanks that I shaped. I also used a disc grinder with a flap sanding wheel to get into some of those hard to get into places that I can't get into with my belt sander. I don't have that small wheel attachment. Flap sanding wheel works great, and in addition to that, I always find that a Dremel tool really gets into a lot of those small diameter areas. Once the blanks are shaped, I'm going to put pinholes. I'm going to drill pinholes through the scale, or through the handles. This stainless does not drill as easy as the 1095 that I'm used to. In the future, I will definitely double clamp them, and I'll definitely use some cutting oil. Again, those are the 3 blanks. And now we'll get to work on the biggest process of the whole knife making for me, which is grinding the bevels. I use a tilt table. This one was made for me by Jason Northgard. And I mounted this, right into the square slot on the Oregon Blade Maker grinder. I also have a 10-inch contact wheel on there for the hollow grinds. And whenever I'm rough grinding these hollow grinds, or any bevels for that matter, you really want to use a coarse grit belt. I'm using a 36 here. The coarser the grit, the less heat you're going to build up, and the more material that you're going to move faster. I'll move to a finer grit belt just to polish it and after the heat treating. Now, I put some Dykem Blue on the edge, and I've scribed my center lines, my railroad tracks, so I have a good visual from each side of the blade where I have to grind to. With this particular tool rest, the tilt table, you're basically just holding the blank flat against the surface of the tool rest and then slowly moving it upward into that 10-inch contact wheel. You don't have to make smooth passes on each stroke. You can move up and grind a portion of the tip or a portion in the middle section of the blade. Basically, you really just have to watch that center line, or those railroad tracks that you marked or scribed onto the edge of the blank. And as long as you're going to bring an even grind to those lines, your bevel is going to end up being uniform. Now, having said that, of course, before you finish, you probably want to put a finer grit paper on, maybe an 80, and you do want to make that last pass kind of smooth from one side to the other. But this system is very easy to use, and the results are pretty nice. Anybody with a little bit of practice with it can really get some nice bevels. Now, I don't know what to expect with this stainless, so I'm actually going to leave the material a little bit thick. This is just rough grinding. I'm going to leave a little bit of thickness there, and I'll do the finish grinding after I get the blanks back from Dave after his heat treating process. And I've got a bucket of water next to the grinder. I cool it off, almost after each pass. After the bevels are rough ground, I'm just going to clean up the surface of the blanks. I do this, I'm just using a welder's magnet on the flat platen of the grinder. Saves a lot of hand sanding. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to experiment with some etching. Now, in the past, I've done a lot of blade etching on 1095, and I've always preferred to do it pre-heat treating because I really like that dark background that you get from the carbon, from the decarb. Not sure how that's going to work out on stainless. I'm going to do one blank just with a satin finish on the blade, another blank with this, just rough finish from etching. And then on Dave's blank, I'm going to apply a honeycomb design, which I cut out on a Silhouette Cameo vinyl cutting machine. So I'll etch this honeycomb design onto the blade of his knife. I'm just using a 12-volt car battery charger. I did go out and buy some stainless steel electrolyte, and I've got a piece of angle iron that I'm holding. I've got tape wrapped around the portion that I'm holding, and the surface that's in contact with the blade is wrapped with gauze. So it's really the texture of that gauze that's been saturated in the stainless electrolyte. It has, I think I'm etching 2 amps, 12 volts, 2 amps. So I've got the negative of the car charger hooked to the blank, and the positive hooked to the blank, the negative hooked to the piece of metal that I'm holding. And I'm spending a good 2 minutes on every spot on that blank. I really wanted to end up with a very, very deep etch that would hold up to the heat treating process. So that's Dave's blank after the etching. This is one of my blanks. This one will have the satin finish, and this one will have the etched, or has the etched finish. Now I send out all 3 of these to Dave. I waited a couple weeks, got them back from him, and this is what they look like. So this is after heat treating. I have to clean them up, but it does look like the etching survived. If you look real close, you can see that honeycomb design. So now I'll go back into the shop. I'll clean up the surface of each one of these blanks, and then I'll also have to clean up the bevel on each one and finish grinding the bevels. So this is with a fine grit paper. I think this is a 120. Again, back to that welder's magnet, and I'm just going to surface grind or polish the surface of the blanks very lightly, really just cleaning up the surface so that I can really visualize that etching. Doesn't take long at all. I'm really actually very happy with the way that the honeycomb etching came out. I did also put them on a Scotch-Brite belt. Cleaned them up just a little bit more. Polished them up a little bit. Now on the stainless, the background did not get that real dark like I'm used to on the 1095. So in hindsight, you probably could do the etching after heat treating and end up with the same results. But it's a learning curve. It's all an experiment for me. So now I'm going to clean up the bevels. I go back to the big wheel with the tilt table attachment. I've got an 80 grit belt on now. And I'm just going to slowly, again, watch my scribed lines. And just clean up the bevels on both sides of that blank. You've got the finer pitch belt on there, so you want to be real careful not to overheat that blade, especially the tip of the blade. You can also put the Scotch-Brite belt right on that same big wheel and polish the bevels a little bit. I kind of like to see some of those grind marks in the bevels, but you know, you could take that to a mirror polish if you wanted. Now, while Dave was heat treating these blanks, I called another member of the Facebook group Knives and Knife Making, Brad Hunt of Bradford Hunt Designs. I sent him a picture of the blank, and then he actually made custom scales. These are Alumilite scales, and he made them to kind of match or highlight the design features of the blade. He does really nice work. His blank material was a little thicker than I wanted, so I just scribed a line around the entire edges, and then I just brought it down to size on the belt sander. I wanted to put liners on these, so what I do is I glue the liners to the scale material first. I put them on a piece of wood. I wrap the wood with parchment paper just so that the two-part epoxy that's adhering the liner to the scale material doesn't incidentally attach the liner to the wood. It'll just pop off very easily. I then use a cutout of the design of the handle that I want, and I just mark that onto the scale material with a black magic marker. Now these scales, I can form the majority of these scales after they're attached to the knife blank, but I can't do that front edge of the handles. So I'm going to form those now. I've clamped both handles together so that they're both going to be exactly the same. And I'll just bring these into the proper shape right on that belt sander. And then I will also put a smoother grit belt on there, and I will polish that leading edge a little bit, because that forward edge of the handles is really hard to polish after they're mounted. I use a two-part epoxy. And now I'm going to, I use a plastic knife. I just kind of like the edges or the ridges from the plastic knife, almost like like you're going to putty tile. Put a little bit of two-part epoxy on both sides, and then I'll just position this exactly where I want it on the blade, and then clamp everything together. And then I set that aside and let it dry. The knife handle mounting technique that I use is actually called the Northgard technique from my friend Jason Northgard. He actually showed me how to do this for a knife that I was making that had brass bolsters, and it's a really good technique when you're trying to get those bolsters, when you're trying to get the handle material perfectly matched up with the bolsters. But I liked it so much that I use it for all of my knives. So I glue one side of the handles in position, then I position my drill bit right through the metal of the blank, clamp it down, and then drill through the handle. So without turning the drill bit on, I'm going to lower it. I'm going to position it perfectly through the pre-existing hole in the blank. Then I'm going to clamp that blank and scale material assembly to a piece of wood, and then I'm going to drill a hole so that hole is perfectly aligned through the blank and through one half of the scales. And I've got a nice big flat surface there from the scale material. The next step is now to cut that first half of the scales to shape. I just do this on a pin saw. You could use a bandsaw, you can almost use anything. But the pin saw works real nice. And when I flip this over, it's really the first chance you get to see what the finished product is going to look like. So now I'm really just going to repeat that process on the other side for the other half of the scales. So I'll glue and then perfectly align the other half of the scales exactly where I want them and clamp them all together and let them dry. Once they're dry, I'll take them, put that whole assembly back in the drill press, line up the drill without turning it on, then clamp everything in position and drill my holes, so that these holes are now perfectly aligned and squared through all three pieces. Now, some people have asked me in the past, why don't you just glue everything up, clamp everything together, and just drill through everything in one shot? Unfortunately, it doesn't work with these aluminite and plastic materials because they melt. You know, they have some damage from the heat. So this system works for me. However you want to mount your scales is fine. Now I'll glue the pins, the brass pins in, and then I can start shaping these scales. You can bring the outside shape of the scales in using the same belt sander. I think I mentioned it before that I have an Oregon Blade Maker 2x72. I absolutely love it. It's an affordable machine, and it really functions very, very nicely, very versatile. Make sure that you cool off even when you're grinding down those pins. The heat can cause damage to the aluminite. I do most of the shaping on a disc grinder with a flap sanding wheel. For some reason the video didn't come out on that section. And then I sanded it using an oscillating sander. I sanded with an 80 and then a 220 grit. And then I go to hand sanding. And I'll hand sand this with a 400, an 800, and then a 1200 grit paper. And usually what I find is that after I get it to 1200, I like to throw it on the buffing machine. I'll polish it once. Then I'll take a real good look at it, and any remaining scratches, I'll go back over it with an 800 and again with a 1200. Not polishing or not sanding the entire handle again, but just sanding those particular spots that still have any minute remaining scratches. Nice clean buffing wheel with a plastic buffing compound. A very light touch when you're buffing this material. Doesn't take much to polish it up. And then after the handles are polished, I'll add an edge. Now I do the rough edge right on that same belt sander, very fine belt, and then I'll finish it off on stones. The obligatory paper test to demonstrate that the edge actually is sharp. And this is the finished product. So this is a knife blank that was designed and made by Dave Irving of Vader Knives. I finished it up for him. The scale material is by Brad Hunt. The other two blanks that I was working on, one of them has a satin finish. I mounted Juma scales to that. And the other one is a etched finished on the blade, a very rustic edge etched finish. Actually, I was very happy with all three knives, how all three of them came out. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. By all means, join us on Facebook, on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making, and check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com for a variety of how-to knife making videos, as well as knife blanks, which are available. Thank you very much.